When I first saw this motorcycle that had been auctioned off at the Mecum Monterey auction for a whopping $825,000, I thought to myself, wow, that is one expensive old Harley.
Look at all those chickens!
See, the thing is, this actually isn't a Harley. So what is it? And why was this guy willing to pay $750,000 for it? I bet it can't even do wheelies. This is a 1936 Crocker small tank, and as crazy as it sounds, that guy who bought this bike probably made a pretty solid investment because this motorcycle is one of the rarest American motorcycles in the world. To understand this, we need to go back in time over 100 years back to the turn of the century where a young motorcycle aficionado named Albert Crocker was racing motorcycles and learning how to be an engineer. But in 1911, Crocker was greatly affected by the death of a famous board track racer named Eddie Hasha. And interestingly enough, Albert would later meet Eddie's widow Gertrude and ultimately marry her in 1924. Albert and Gertrude ended up having one child. There's quite a bit of myth surrounding Albert Crocker's life and his career, but to me it seems apparent that his pursuit of motorcycle engineering and ultimately production came out of that scare in 1911. He didn't pursue racing anymore like he had been. Albert worked at Indian dealerships, but ultimately he ended up buying Indian's Los Angeles dealership known as Freed Indian, and this would end up becoming his own motorcycle company, Crocker Motorcycles. And he would go on to produce just a few hundred bikes in total. But here to me is the really interesting part. The Crocker was a real threat to Harley and Indian at this time because Albert had figured out how to make a motorcycle that was faster, more reliable, and ultimately, as we saw over the next 50, 60 years, his bikes were significantly more durable and long-lasting. Crocker motorcycles were, as Matt Wachsler says, the first American superbike. Fast motorcycles during this pre-war period were mainly British bikes. American motorcycles were more like tractors. Fast enough, powerful enough, made to go down big, long roads. But in comparison to the speedy, quick, light bikes across the pond in Great Britain, Indian and Harley just did not have a chance, at least when it came to production motorcycles. Harley made some pretty fast motorcycles, but just in all-out road race, the British bikes were the fastest. But the Crocker V twins of the late 1930s and the early 1940s were a completely different story. In fact, Albert was so confident in his motorcycle's ability to perform, he promised any Crocker owner that if they could prove that a Harley or an Indian was faster than one of their bikes, faster than the bike that they had bought, they could return the bike and get all of their money back, and the story goes that Albert never once had to do this. 1936 is a great example, and this is the bike we're talking about, as this was the first year for Harley's fastest bike to date, the legendary 1936 Knucklehead, and that bike weighed 565 pounds and produced about 40 horsepower. The 1936 Crocker small tank that was sold at Mecum, when it came out, it weighed under 500 pounds and produced a ridiculous 55-ish horsepower, maybe even up to 60 horsepower. So to put this into perspective, a brand new Harley Sportster 883, like today brand new 2021 or 2022, weighs 565 pounds, so the same as the Knucklehead, and produces less than 50 horsepower. In terms of power and weight, it's really not that different than the 1936 Knucklehead. Sorry if you guys own one of these, I'm sure it's a great bike, but if you do run into a 1936 Crocker on the line, it's gonna destroy you. Harley knew that the Crocker knew something Harley didn't know, they just didn't know what it was that they didn't know that Crocker knew. Does that make sense? The rest of the story is pretty sad, honestly. Crocker really couldn't keep up as a company when World War II hit. In fact, all of the motorcycle companies wouldn't have been able to stay alive if they hadn't gotten contracts to basically produce motorcycles for the military. Harley got the contract to make war bikes, and of course Crocker probably wasn't even considered. The army would have been like, hey, we need 50,000 bikes, and Crocker would have shown up with like 6 bikes. But hey, they would have produced more horsepower. But back to the question. Why is this motorcycle so valuable? And specifically as well, what exactly was it that Albert Crocker knew that good old Harley just didn't get? Well, the simplest answer to why the Crocker was so much faster than Harley and Indian was because of a more advanced system for things like compression, magneto, and also airflow. So better compression, a better magneto, and Crocker used a smaller intake port, so that basically meant that they could move air through the engine faster than Harley and Indian. The gist is this: the Crocker motorcycle was unequivocally a better motorcycle. And that's not to say that Harley and Indian didn't make great bikes for their time. Crocker just made the best, at least in America. Crocker's bikes were so good that they really were legit, real competitors to the incredibly fast and light British machines that were being produced. Now there's loads of other features, like the gas tank, which is made out of cast aluminum, which means that the inside of the tank simply doesn't rust. unlike virtually every other motorcycle from that time. So to answer the question of why this bike sold for $750,000, the answer is simple. It's not just that it's rare, it's not just that it's beautiful, it's that it truly stands out as not only one of the greatest motorcycles in American history, it's one of the greatest motorcycles of all time, and it's largely overlooked by most people. Now I figured a great way to end this video would be to show you a few clips of people running this bike so you can get a sense for just how powerful it is, because it sounds amazing.
Third time's a charm.
Now you may think, okay, this bike is cool, but who has that much money laying around and where the heck am I going to find one? Well, if you want to spend just a bit less money, Crocker is apparently still a company and is making motorcycles currently today. Well, not in the same way that brands like Honda or Triumph are making bikes. You can't just walk into a dealership and be like, hey, y'all got a Crocker I can buy? I don't think they're gonna know what you're talking about if you do that. In fact, I'm not even sure how you go about buying this bike, but I do believe that they're all custom made, handmade, and they claim that they are producing motorcycles, and I'm sure they're amazing. All right, if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe for more videos like this, and until the next one, ride safe.